Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Tenet in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, friends, in today's video. The movie we're going to talk about is called Tenet. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you. I'm also going to give you all the information on which OT platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film, storyline, star cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you, friends, to watch this video till the end, so let's start the video. Tenet is a 2020 science fiction action thriller film written and directed by Christopher Nolan, who also produced it with his wife Emma Thomas. It stars John David Washington, Robert Pattinson, Elizabeth Debicki, Dimple Kapadia, Michael Caine, and Kenneth Branagh. The film follows a former CIA agent who is recruited into a secret organization tasked with tracing the origin of objects that are traveling backward through time and their connection to an attack from the future to the present. Nolan took over 5 years to write the screenplay after deliberating about Tenet's central ideas for more than a decade. Pre-production began in late 2018, casting took place in March 2019, and principal photography lasted 6 months in multiple countries. After delays due to the COVID-19 pandemic, Tenet was released in the United Kingdom on August 26, 2020, and in the United States on September 3, 2020. It was Nolan's last film to be released by Warner Bros. Pictures. Tenet was the first Hollywood tentpole to open in theaters during the pandemic and grossed $365 million worldwide on a $205 million budget, making it the 5th highest-grossing film of 2020, despite failing to break even. The film divided critics but won Best Visual Effects at the 93rd Academy Awards and received numerous other accolades. Plot: on the 14th, the protagonist leads a covert CIA extraction during a staged terrorist siege at an opera house in Kiev. He is saved from cord forces by a masked operative wearing an orange cord with a round trinket. The protagonist retrieves an artifact, but his team is captured and tortured. He swallows a suicide pill but wakes up to find it was a fake, a test that only he passed. He is recruited by Tenet, a secretive organization that briefs him on objects with inverted entropy that move backward through time. With his handler Neil, he traces inverted munitions to Priya Singh, an arms dealer in Mumbai. Priya reveals that she is a member of Tenet, and the man who inverted her bullets, Russian oligarch Andrei Sator, is communicating with the future. Sator's estranged wife, Kat Barton, is an art appraiser who authenticated a Goya forged by her friend Aripo. Sator purchased the Goya at auction, believing it to be legitimate, later using it to blackmail Kat into staying with him. To earn Kat's help, the protagonist and Neil try to steal the Goya from Sator's Freeport facility at Oslo Airport, but are thwarted by 2 masked men who emerge from either side of a machine. In Mumbai, Priya explains it was a turnstile, a device that inverts entropy. The 2 men were the same person, traveling in opposite directions through time. She reveals that Sator's henchmen sabotaged his CIA team, but Kayard got the artifact Kilogram. Believing that the protagonist has destroyed the forgery, Kat introduces him to Sator in Italy. Sator agrees to help steal the artifact, which the protagonist and Neil do in Tallinn, but they are ambushed by an inverted Sator holding Kat hostage. The protagonist hides the artifact and rescues Kat, but they are recaptured and taken to a free port in Tallinn, where the inverted Sator interrogates them for the location of the artifact, shooting Kat with an inverted bullet. Tenet troops led by Commander Ives arrive, but Sator escapes into the turnstile. To save Kat's life, they also invert themselves. The inverted protagonist drives back to the ambush to retrieve the hidden artifact, where he encounters Sator, who overpowers him and takes it. To uninvert, the protagonist travels back in time to the free port in Oslo, fights his past self, and enters the turnstile, followed by Neil and Kat. In Oslo, Priya tells him Sator now has all 9 pieces of the algorithm. a device that future antagonists need to invert the entropy of the world and destroy its past. Priya had planned for Sator to get the artifact to reveal the other 8 pieces in preparing his dead drop. Recalling an earlier conversation with Michael Crosby, the protagonist realizes it is a nuclear hypocenter detonated on the 14th in Sator's hometown, the Russian closed city of Stalsk-12. On a Tenet ship traveling back to the 14th, Kat reveals Sator has terminal cancer and is omnicidal. They surmise that after the Kiev Opera House siege on the 14th, Sator returns to a family vacation in Vietnam to commit suicide, sending the dead drop coordinates to the future via a dead man's switch. Arriving at the 14th, Kat poses as her past self in Vietnam as the Tenet forces in Stalsk-12 recover the algorithm. They use a temporal pincer movement, with inverted and non-inverted troops creating a diversion so the protagonist and Ives can steal the algorithm before detonation. Sator's henchman Volkov traps them in the hypocenter. Calling from Vietnam, Sator explains the antagonists are trying to prevent catastrophes that will be caused by climate change. As Volkov is about to execute the protagonist, an inverted soldier with an orange cord with a trinket appears and sacrifices himself, enabling the protagonist and Ives to escape with the algorithm. The hypocenter detonates in Stalsk-12 as Kat kills Sator in Vietnam. The protagonist, Neil, and Ives arrange to separate and hide pieces of the algorithm. The protagonist notices the orange cord and trinket on Neil's bag. Neil reveals that he was recruited in his past by a future protagonist and that Neil has known him for a long time. He leaves them his piece of the algorithm to invert and sacrifice himself in the hypocenter. Later, in London, Priya plans to kill Kat to maintain the secrecy of Tenet. Having realized that he is Tenet's creator, the protagonist kills Priya and watches Kat leave with her son. Cast: John David Washington as the protagonist, a CIA operative and founder of Tenet. Robert Pattinson as Neil, the protagonist's handler. Elizabeth Debicki as Catherine Kat Barton, niece of Frederick Barton, art appraiser and Sator's estranged wife. Dimple Kapadia as Priya Singh, an Indian arms trafficker and also a member of Tenet. Sir Michael Caine as Michael Crosby, a British intelligence officer and contact of Priya Singh. Kenneth Branagh as Andrei Sator, a British domiciled Russian oligarch from Stalsk-12 who is communicating with the future. Martin Donovan as Faye, the protagonist's CIA boss. Aaron Taylor Johnson as Ives, a Tenet military commander. Fiona Dourif as Wheeler, leader of the Tenet Blue Team. Yuri Kolokolnikov as Volkov, Sator's bodyguard. Himesh Patel as Mahir, a fixer hired by Neil. Clemence Poesie as Barbara, a Tenet scientist. Also appearing are Jefferson Hall, the well-dressed man, who the protagonist tries to extract at the Opera House. Andrew Howard as the driver who sabotages the CIA's Kiev operation and tortures the protagonist. Wes Chatham as SWAT-3, a member of the protagonist's covert CIA team in Kiev. Denzel Smith as Sanjay Singh, Priya's husband. Jeremy Theobald as the steward at the Reform Club. Laurie Shepard as Max, Kat and Sator's son. Jack Cutmore Scott as Klaus, an employee of security firm Rodas at the Freeport in Oslo. Josh Stewart as the voice of a Tenet agent in Mumbai. And Sean Avery as the lead soldier on the Red Team. Post-production. During filming, sound designer Richard King sent a team to Eagle Mountain to record the Chinooks and Mi-8 and to Southampton to record the F-50 catamarans. Others were hired to capture the oral atmosphere of Oslo, Mumbai, and Tallinn. King got audio of both live and blank automatic weapon rounds at a gun range in San Francisco Canyon and rented a runway to test how the vehicles in the film sound. Jennifer Lame replaced Nolan's longtime editor Lee Smith, who was occupied with 2019's 1917. Visual effects supervisor Andy Lockley said the film's VFX shots involved the participation of 300 employees at DNEG. Music. Main article Tenet. Ludwig Göransson was chosen to compose the film's music after Nolan's frequent collaborator and first choice, Hans Zimmer, turned down the offer in favor of the 2021 film Dune. Researching retrograde composition led Göransson to generate melodies that would sound the same forward and backward. He experimented with distorted industrial noise and, to represent Sator's irradiated breathing, asked Nolan to tape his own breath in a studio. Göransson produced 10 to 15 minutes of music each week. The first scoring session was held in November 2019, and sessions continued into early 2020. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Göransson recorded musicians at their homes. The Tenet soundtrack contains The Plan, a song by Travis Scott, which plays over the film's closing credits. Reception. Box office. As of January 29, 2024, Tenet has grossed $58.5 million in the United States and Canada and $306.8 million in other territories, for a worldwide total of $363.7 million. With a production budget of $200 million, it is Nolan's most expensive original project. IndieWire speculated that marketing costs pushed the final sum to $300 to $350 million, though some analysts predicted it would incur lower advertising costs than usual, owing to inexpensive live sports ads. Box office analyst Jeff Bach estimated the film would need to make $400 to $500 million to break even. In November 2020, rival studios expected the film to lose up to $100 million, but Warner Bros. Insisted losses would not top $50 million. Nolan received 20% of the film's first dollar gross. The film was projected to make $25 to $30 million internationally over its first 5 days. In South Korea, pre-sale IMAX tickets sold out, and weekend previews earned $717,000 from 590 venues. Another 4 days in the country yielded $4.13 million from about 2,200 screens, bringing the cum to $5.1 million by the end of the week. Tenet debuted to $53 million in 41 countries, grossing $7.1 million in the United Kingdom, $6.7 million in France, and $4.2 million in Germany. It made $58.1 million its second weekend, with China $30 million from first showings, the UK $13.1 million, France $10.7 million, Germany $8.7 million, and South Korea $8.2 million as the largest markets. It made $30.6 million its third weekend, earning $16.4 million in the UK, $13.2 million in France, $11.4 million in Germany, $10.3 million in South Korea, and $10.2 million in China. The film earned $11.4 million in its first 2 weeks in Japan, and after opening in India on December 4, 2020, made about $1.2 million in its first 10 days in the country. In Estonia, Tenet became the highest-grossing film of all time, with a total gross of $1.2 million. In the United States and Canada, with 65% of theaters operating at 25 to 40% capacity, the film earned $20.2 million from 2,810 theaters in its first 11 days of release, $12 million in the U.S., $2.5 million in Canada, and the rest from previews. The second, third, and fourth weekends added $6.6 million, $4.6 million, and $3.3 million, respectively. Tenet remained atop the American box office its fifth weekend with $2.7 million before ceding the number one spot to The War with Grandpa its sixth weekend. The film's worldwide 2024 IMAX re-release began on February 23, 2024, in 55 IMAX locations, including 12 showing the film in 70mm, opening against the one-week North American engagement of the Dolby Cinema reissue of Les Miserables 2012. It grossed $600,000 globally on its 3-day opening weekend for a per-theater average of more than $10,000. For transparency's sake, it feels important to state that this film was screened for limited press in Chicago with extreme precautions that simply won't be in place for most ticket buyers, at least for weeks, including 1% capacity of a huge sanitized theater first thing in the morning. The intent of this review is not to encourage or discourage anyone from attending a theatrical screening at this specific time. It is an analysis of the work itself for posterity. No one could possibly mistake Tenet as being by anyone but Christopher Nolan. First, it has the kind of budget that only Nolan could get for an original screenplay. There's so much money in every bursting frame of this opulent film that a scene in which gold bars are literally dumped on a runway feels almost like a self-referential wink. Second, it contains one of those time-twisting narratives that have defined the Nolan brand, one that blends robust action sequences with high-concept stories that viewers have to legitimately strain to follow. Finally, at times, it even seems to echo previous Nolan projects like an album of remastered greatest hits. There are war action scenes that recall Dunkirk, an espionage narrative that feels like Inception, and even a whole lot of people talking through masks a la Bane in The Dark Knight Rises. It is 100% designed as an experience for people who have unpacked films like The Prestige and Memento late into the night, hoping to give Nolan fans more to chew on than ever before. More certainly seems to be the operating principle of Tenet, even if the chewing can get exhausting. Note, spoilers will be incredibly light, but if you want to go in completely unvarnished, as many Nolan fans do, you've been warned. Tenet wastes no time, dropping viewers into an attack on a symphony performance in Kiev and barely allowing anyone to get oriented. One of the agents sent in to retrieve a high-profile asset during the assault is a man known only as the protagonist, John David Washington, proving more than capable of carrying a blockbuster film with his charismatic performance. Our hero is captured by the enemy, tortured, and takes a cyanide capsule, as he was ordered to do in training. He survives, and his allegiance to the system and his orders leads to a promotion of sorts, a top-secret assignment that involves a new technology that has the potential to literally rewrite human history. The protagonist is taken to a remote facility and introduced to the concept of inverted objects. We look at an object and it is traveling forward through time along with us. That's obvious from elementary school science class. But what if an object could go in the other direction through history instead? Apparently, objects have been doing exactly this, and the powers that be need to control it, because if a bullet could be sent back through time, what happens if a nuclear weapon takes the same trip? Teaming up with a mysterious partner named Neil, a charming Robert Pattinson, our hero tracks inverted objects to a villainous Russian arms dealer named Andrei Kenneth Branagh. To get closer to this mega-wealthy madman, the protagonist uses Andrei's wife Kat, Elizabeth Debicki, who loathes her abusive husband, but is being blackmailed into staying with him via threats that she will lose her son if she doesn't do exactly what he says. On a very basic level, Tenet is about the extremes of unmonitored power. When one becomes so rich and powerful that they can literally shape world events, why not try to shape world history too? Sound a little familiar? Andrei is very much cut from the same cloth as classic Bond villains, complete with unchecked opulence, Russian accent, and snarling line delivery. Blend Nolan's obsession with time-twisting high concepts and his love of classic action construction, and you have some idea what Tenet feels like. However, there's never been a Bond movie so stuffed with expository dialogue. Tenet spends roughly 2 hours of its 150-minute runtime explaining what is happening, why it is happening, and what might happen next. And yet, even with that, it's still incredibly difficult to follow because Nolan goes so far down his own rabbit hole of time travel that one almost needs to take notes to keep up. And I still think it arguably wouldn't all add up if they could. Scene after scene of Washington, Pattinson, Branagh, and Debicki trying to convey the plot becomes exhausting, and it's Nolan's biggest mistake. It would have been better to just leave more unsaid and jump chaotically into the film's mood and visuals instead of so often returning to overanalyzing a plot most people still won't be able to follow. At times, it feels like a film crafted for YouTube explainer video culture. There's already one online that purports to deconstruct the ending, and the movie isn't even out in most of the world. Early in the film, the scientist who explains inversion says, "Don't try to understand, feel it," and I wished Nolan had listened to her more. For some of his fans, this narrative assault is exactly what they're looking for. But I prefer emotional registers in my Nolan that he seems only casually interested in here. The stakes don't feel as high as Dunkirk, the maze construction isn't as thrilling as Inception, and even the characters don't feel as easy to invest in as Interstellar. Almost as if he knows his puzzle box is ice cold, Nolan adds the subplot about Kat losing her son, but it's so underdeveloped that I don't think her kid even has a line. The kid is as much of a device as an inverted bullet. If Tenet can be a hard movie to engage with emotionally or even comprehend narratively, that doesn't take away from its craftsmanship on a technical level. It's an impressive film simply to experience, bombarding the viewer with bombastic sound design and gorgeous widescreen cinematography by Hoyte van Hoytema. The movie never sags in terms of technical elements and even performance. Everyone is committed to Nolan's runaway speed. Van Hoytema's work is vibrant, Jennifer Lame's editing is tight, and the performances are all good to great. In particular, Pattinson really shines in a playful register that he's not often allowed to use. The decision to release Tenet in theaters instead of VOD was controversial for many reasons, but there's no denying that Tenet was conceived by Nolan to be an experience that shouldn't be paused and needs to be projected with a speaker system turned up to 11, even if that would have still been true if Warner Brothers had delayed the film until it was safer to see it. I almost got the sense that playing Tenet at a lower volume, or even pausing it at home to take a break, might reveal its flaws. Nolan doesn't want you to be able to dissect it or be distracted by your phone while you watch it. The irony is that he doesn't want you to be able to rewind it. Tenet is a movie about momentum, reflected both in its narrative and its aesthetic, and more cracks would show without it. Viewer response to Tenet will come down to how much one engages with that momentum. I expect a surprising number of people will open the door and jump out of this moving race car, look, another palindrome, before it crosses the finish line, exhausted by a story that doesn't make sense even as it's trying to explain itself to you. Others will embrace the filmmaking's energy, which starts with intensity and doesn't let up much at all. The word I kept thinking of was one I used earlier in this review, aggressive. That may sound like high praise to Nolan fans looking for something other than a lazy, predictable blockbuster, and harsh criticism to those who aren't looking to be left weary by a self-serious sci-fi epic. In the spirit of a film about objects moving opposite ways in time in the same space, maybe both groups are right. Review. Tenet. No wonder Christopher Nolan thinks Tenet can save cinema. That's a dawdle compared to the challenge faced in his film, which we're frequently reminded is a proper whopper. Prevent World War III? Bigger? Avoid Armageddon? Worse. To spell it out would be a spoiler, but think 9/11 times 100, to quote Team America World Police, a film Tenet faintly resembles. The fate of a few multiplexes is small fry. Lucky, really, because Tenet is not a movie it's worth the nervous braving a trip to the big screen to see, no matter how safe it is. I'm not even sure that in 5 years' time it'd be worth staying up to catch on telly. To say so is sad, perhaps heretical. But for audiences to abandon their living rooms in the long term, the first carrot had better not leave a bad taste. Our protagonist, the protagonist, John David Washington, is an agent for an international undercover organization who's promoted during a new Cold War, Ice Cold. That test you passed, a flunky tells him, not everybody does. We're never told exactly what the test was, but the implication is clear. This is not a man who'd have trouble recognizing an elephant. Then follows the first of many scenes in which a supporting actor who may or may not have a background in nuclear physics blinks through 500 hours of exposition about how the future is attacking us with bullets that go backwards. First up is Clémence Poésy, who talks about inverted weapons and the detritus of coming wars so listlessly you want to giggle. Next, Michael Caine, who says, I presume you're familiar with the Soviet-era closed cities over steak and chips. Less lucky are Dimple Kapadia's epigrammatic arms dealer and Aaron Taylor Johnson, stuck with reams of militaries detailing temporal pincer movements. As for Robert Pattinson's raffish wingman, brilliant and dapper and apparently based on Christopher Hitchens, Pattinson is never less than watchable. And his affectations can be a welcome distraction, but he still just seems like some bloke who's got drunk in Banana Republic's scarf department. All these encounters eventually lead to Andrei Sator, a Russian oligarch whose Blofeld stylings Kenneth Branagh eagerly embraces. Just tell me if you have slept with my wife is his opening gambit, quickly followed by, how would you like to die? A rhetorical inquiry. Sator only does one sort of murder, which sounds time-consuming and involves testicles. But Branagh's ham spoils as the promising camp of his first scenes flattens into bog-standard rottery. The more we learn of our antagonist's plans for humanity, the harder it is to care whether he pulls them off. Some of this is weariness. For all Tenet's technical ambition, the plot is rote and the furnishings tired. Eastern European heavies lumber about with pliers and meat cleavers. Clocks literally tick. Synths groan deeply on the soundtrack. No one shoots anyone without elaborately speechifying first. Extreme lengths, remote catamaran, must be pursued to ensure confidential conversations. The luxe locations titillate for a bit, but there's something tonally off about the aspirational, how-to-spend-it aesthetic. Soder's Italian villa, in particular, really overdoes the busts. Washington doesn't help. A naturally charismatic performer, he's weirdly muted and muzzled here. As a side note, Tenet will surely go down in history as a film shot during peak beard. The spark he's supposed to have with Soder's estranged wife, Kat, Elizabeth Debicki, isn't there, which makes for a motivation problem. Kat does at least have some agency, unlike Nolan's previous litany of saintly dead spouses, but her drive is primarily about safeguarding her relationship with a young son we barely see, and when we do, seems less than winning. Tenet's real engine is its action sequences, in particular one involving a cargo plane and another multi-car chase. They're good. They have to be. As the eagle-eyed have pointed out, Tenet is a palindrome, which means it's possible you'll see some of the same scenes twice. Yet, for all the nifty bits of reverse chronology, there's little that lingers in the imagination in the same way as Inception or even Interstellar's showcase bendy business. You exit the cinema a little less energized than you were going in. There's something grating about a film which insists on detailing its pseudoscience while also conceding you probably won't have followed a thing. We're clobbered with plot, then comforted with tea towel homilies about how what's happened has happened. The world is more than ready for a fabulous blockbuster, especially one that happens to feature face masks and chat about going back in time to avoid catastrophe. It's a real shame, Tenet, isn't it? The film has a weighted average score of 69 out of 100 based on 50 critics, indicating generally favorable reviews. Gaudiofobia described Tenet as a grandly entertaining time-slipping spectacle. Of The Guardian critical Peter Bradshaw felt it was both madly preposterous and amazing cinema. A Kevin Mara Times awarded the film a full 5 stars, deeming it a delightfully convoluted masterpiece. Robbie Colina of Fatha Telegraph likened it to Noel Lanza, Inception, and praised the depth, subtlety, and wit of Pattinson and Debicki's performances. In his review for a Rolling Stone, Peter Traversa described the film as pure ravishing cinema and called Washington a star in the making, who brings a natural athletic grace to the stunts and hand-to-hand combat. As the Dispatch, Alec then found The Tentative to have a gloriously innovative storyline with incredible visuals to match. A Mark Daniel of the Toronto soon gave the film 4 out of 4 stars, deeming it the cinematic equivalent of a Rubik's Cube. T. Richard Rohr of the Chicago Santa Massa gave it 3.5 out of 4 stars, praising Debicki's mesmerizing portrayal and concluding that it's the kind of film that reminds us of the magic of the movie egoing experience despite not reaching cinematic greatness. A Keith Fryo Fotheringer wrote that Tenet has the makings of a cult film with a failed release due to the pandemic, a muted critical reception, and a twisty narrative that demands multiple viewings. Director Denis Villeneuve called the film a masterpiece and an incredible cinematic achievement. James Bardian noted that the film may be the most challenging of Nolan's films to date in terms of the concepts forming the narrative's foundation, backwards, moving entropy, nonlinear thinking, temporal paradoxes, but questioned whether its runtime might prove to be problematic. But he named it the best film of 2020. Dua Leslie Falprin. Hollywood Reporter Rowe felt that Washington was dashing by a little doll, and that Debicki's performance adds a color to Nolan's palette, and she has persuasive chemistry with Bran in their joint portrait of a violent, dysfunctional love-hate relationship. She concluded that Tenet is rich in audacity and originality, but lacks a certain humanity. A Jessica Kango Foth, New York Times, has described the film as Nolan's time-bending take on a James Bond, praising the film's cinematography, score, editing, acting, and immaculately creaseless costumes while also deeming it a hugely expensive, blissfully empty spectacle. At a week, Lisa Asher-Liberto also highlighted the similarities between Tenet and the James Bond films, but also felt it was a daring, surprising, and entirely original piece of work, reverent in its spectacle and haunting in its mesmerizing, dreamlike form. Branagh's character was described by some critics as a stereotypical Russian villain. A ChristinaFavelier.com called Branagh accented as a Bond villain Russian mastermind. Mike Mahel of Fendi Y gave the film a car grade and called it a humorless disappointment. And Michael Phillips of the Chicago Tribune awarded it 2 out of 4 stars, writing that he wished the film exploited its own ideas more dynamically. At the New York Post, Johnny Aleksinski also gave it 2 out of 4 stars, calling it Nolan's most confusing work so far, but acknowledged being swept up by Nolan's incomparable cinematic vision. Kathleen Sachs of the Chicago Reader gave the film 1.5 out of 4 stars, concluding that Nolan doesn't show much growth in his most recent self-indulgent work. O'Brien. Lloyd Entertainment said P or a sound mixing often rendered dialogue inaudible when viewed on 35, and film suggesting viewing the film in a digital cinema package files to reduce the problem. Athea San Francisco Chronic. Los Ali also found the tentative difficult to understand and continued that even worse, it inspires little desire to understand it. In July 2025, it was one of the films voted for the Reader Choice edition of FA New York Times, a list of the 100 best movies of the 21st century, finishing at number 277. Audience reception. Audiences polled by Asinascaria gave the film an average grade of B on an A+ to F scale. Andu Poster reported that 80% of those gave the film a positive score, with 65% saying they would recommend it. Some publications reported that the film gained a cult following among science fiction enthusiasts and Nolan's fan base. Accolades 108 received nominations for a Best Production Design and the Best Visual Effects at the 93rd Academy Awards, winning the latter at the 74th British Academy Film Awards. The film won the Best Special Visual Effects Award A and also won an award in the same category at the 26th Critics' Choice Awards out of its 5 nominations. It received a nomination for a Best Original Scaria at the 78th Golden Globe Awards. Themes and analysis. Tenet's complex plot and character timelines, ambiguities, and hidden details have been analyzed, leading to various fan theories and interpretations. The first-century Latina Satyr Square, which inspired the film's title, as well as 2 character names, Satyr and Ario the Goya Forger, the location of the opening sequence opera, and the name of Satyr's security company. Roaspal and Droa words, which are spelled the same forward and backward, and Oncessa words, which when spelled backward produce another word, appear throughout the film in various guises. The 5-letter words from the Pale and Drama Satquaria appear as names and locations in the film. Satyr, the Russian oligarcho, the art forger, then at the name of the film and the protagonist's organization. Opera. The opening scene takes place at the Chief of Opera House, and Rose, the name of the security company running Oslo Freeport. There is a further nod to the word tenant in this film's final battle, in which the red and blue teams each have 10 minutes to carry out their non-inverted 10 and inverted net operations. In 12A, when the protagonist is being tortured, trains pass by in opposite directions like G8 till the Pilgro Ranson score includes melodies that sound the same forward and backward. The film itself is a form of temporal palindrome, as it ends at the same time as the events of the beginning of the film are taking place. The 14th, temporal paradoxes and free will. Several characters have complex timelines in the film due to inverting and reverting, notably Neil, the protagonist, Cedar, and Cat Dot. Inversion allows multiple versions of a character to exist simultaneously. For instance, there are 5 simultaneous Nails that are known in the world during the moments of the climactic scene inside the 12 Hypo Center where he dies. 2 inverted and 1 normal on the battlefield. one inverted at the opera siege and one more normal somewhere else, in the world who will later meet the protagonist in Neil's first appearance of the film. And the implication is that an older future protagonist is orchestrating the events of the film behind the scenes without ever being seen by the viewer or his past self. In an example of a temper pincer movement, inversion also sets up Habut's trap paradoxes, whereby events are caused by themselves in a chicken or the egg scenario. Free will is a theming a Tenet. There are suggestions that a Tenet's universe is deterministic. So what happens, including Boot's trap? Paradoxes will always happen, and consequently there is arguably no free will in one of the film's common refrains. Ignorance is our ammunition could hint at the illusionist stance that free will does not exist, but people should act as if they have free will. However, the characters, especially Neil, express uncertainty as to whether history can be altered, and say several times during the film, "What's happened?" Neil's attitude towards free will could be interpreted a compatibilist, whereby free will and determinism are seen as compatible. Cat is seen as the character who most strongly embodies free will in a tentative by choosing to stray from the plan and shoot Sator, at which point she is free from his control. Cat relays to the protagonist that when she was returning with Max to Sator's yacht in Vietnam and saw a woman, her future self, unbeknownst to past Cat, diving gracefully off the yacht, she felt jealous of that woman's freedom. Similarly, there is uncertainty in a 108 regarding the grandfather paradoxa, and whether the use of the algorithm in the future wiping out the past, the time of the events in a Tenet, would also wipe out the future. A10A has been interpreted as a war between past and future scientific accuracy. The plot revolves around reversing the entropia of things and people, resulting in a time reversibility and the film references physics concepts including the second law of thermodynamics, a Maxwell's demon, and a phenomena, and the Wheeler's notion of a one-electron universe. Nonetheless, Christopher Nolan stated in the film's press notes, "We're not going to make any case for this being scientifically accurate. No wonder Christopher Nolan thinks Tenet can save cinema. That's a dawdle compared to the challenge faced in his film, which we're frequently reminded is a proper whopper. Prevent World War II bigger, avoid Armageddon. Worse, to spell it out would be a spoiler, but think a 9/11 times 100. To quote Team America, World Police, a film Tenet faintly resembles the fate of a few multiplexes is small for a lucky, really, because E10A is not a movie. It's worth the nervous braving a trip to the big screen to see, no matter how safe it is. I'm not even sure that in 5 years' time, it would be worth staying up to catch on telly. To say so is sad, perhaps, heretical, but for audiences to abandon their living rooms in the long term, the first carrot head better not leave a bad taste. Our protagonist, the protagonist, John David Washington, is an agent for an international undercover organization who's promoted during a new Cold War. Ice cold. That test you passed, a flunky. Tells him, not everybody does. We're never told exactly what the test was, but the implication is clear. This is not a man who'd have trouble recognizing an elephant. Then follows the first of many scenes in which a supporting actor who may or may not have a background in nuclear physics blinks through 500 hours of exposition about how the future is attacking us with bullets that go backwards. First up is copyright man's poet, the copyright sigh, who talks about inverted weapons and the detritus of coming more so listlessly you want to giggle next Michael Caine, who says, I presume you're familiar with the Soviet-era closed cities over steak. And Chip's less lucky why Dimple Capey epigrammatic arms dealer, and Aaron Taylor. Johnson stuck with reams of militaries detailing temporal pincer movements as, for Robert Pattinson's raffish wingmen, brilliant and dapper and dandy, apparently based on Christopher Hitchens. Pattinson is never less than watchable, and his affectations can be a welcome distraction, but he still just seems like some bloke who's got drunk in Banana Republic's scarf department. All these encounters eventually lead to Embrace a Russian oligarch whose blow-off stylings a Kenneth Branagh eagerly embraces. Just tell me, if you have slept with my wife is his opening gambit, quickly followed by how would you like to die, a rhetorical inquiry. Satter only does one sort of murder, which sounds time-consuming and involves testicles. But Bran Exegam spoils as the promising comp of his first scenes flattens into bog standard. The more we learn of our antagonist's plans for humanity, the harder it is to care whether he pulls them off. Some of this is weariness for all Tenet's technical ambition. The plot is rote and the furnishings tired. Eastern European heavies lumber about with pliers and meat cleavers. Clocks literally tick since grown deeply on the soundtrack. No, one shoots anyone without elaborately speechifying first extreme lengths. Remote catamaran must be pursued to ensure confidential conversations. The looks locations titled for a bit, but there's something tonally off about the aspirational how to spend it aesthetic. Sat's Italian villa in particular really overdo the busts. Washington doesn't help, a naturally charismatic performer. He's weirdly muted and muzzled here. As a side note, Tenet will surely go down in history as a film shot during peak beard. The spark he's supposed to have with Sater's arranged wife, Cat Elizabeth, Debicki isn't there, which makes for a motivation problem. Cat does at least have some agency, unlike Nolan's previous litany of saintly dead spouses, but her drive is primarily about safeguarding her relationship with a young son we barely see, and when we do, seems less than winning. Tenard's real engine is its action sequences, in particular one involving a cargo plane and another multi-car chase. They're good, they have to be. As the Eagle-Eyed have pointed out, 10, it is a palindrome, which means it's possible lingers in the imagination in the same way as Inception or even Interstellar showcase bandandy business. You exit the cinema a little less energized than you were going in. There's something grating about a film which insists on detailing its pseudoscience while also conceding you probably won't have followed a thing. We're clobbered with plot then. Comforted with tea towel homilies about how what's happened has happened. The world is more than ready for a fabulous blockbuster, especially one that happens to feature face masks and chat about going back in time to avoid catastrophe. It's a real shame, Tenet, isn't it? Tenet is released in the UK on 26th of August for transparency's sake. It feels important to state that this film was screened for limited press in Chicago with extreme precautions that simply won't be in place for most ticket buyers at least for weeks, including 1%. Capacity of a huge sanitized theater first thing in the morning. The intent of this review is not to encourage or discourage anyone from attending a theatrical screening at this specific time. It is an analysis of Foth, work itself for posterity. And no one could possibly mistake Tenet as being by anyone but a Christopher Nolan. First, it has the kind of budget that only Nolan could get for an original screenplay. There's so much money in every bursting frame of this opulent film that a scene in which gold bars are literally dumped on a runway feels almost like a self-referential wink. Second, it contains one of those time-twisting narratives that have defined the Nolan brand. One that blends robust action sequences with high-concept stories that viewers have to buff, legitimately strained to follow. Finally, at times it even seems to echo previous Nolan projects like an album of remastered greatest hits. There are war action scenes that recall Dunkirk and espionage narrative that feels like Inception, and even a whole lot of people talking through masks, a lane in the dark, Night Rises. It is 100% designed as an experience for people who have unpacked films like The Prestige and Memento late into the night, hoping to give Nolan fans more to chew on than ever before. More certainly seems to be the operating principle of Tenet, even if the chewing can get exhausting. Tenet wastes no time dropping viewers into an attack on a symphony performance in Kiev and barely allowing anyone to get oriented. One of the agents sent in to retrieve a high-profile asset during the assault is a man known only as the protagonist. John David Washington, proving more than capable of carrying a blockbuster film with his charismatic performance. Our hero is captured by the enemy, tortured, and takes a cyanide capsule as he was ordered to do in training. He survives, and his allegiance to the system and his order leads to a promotion of sorts, a top-secret assignment that involves a new technology that has the potential to literally rewrite human history. The protagonist is taken to a remote facility and introduced to the concept of inverted objects. We look at an object and it is traveling forward through time along with us. That's obvious from elementary school science class. But what if an object could go in the other direction through history? Instead, apparently objects have been doing exactly this, and the powers that be need to control it. Because if a bullet could be sent back through time, what happens if a nuclear weapon takes the same trip? Teaming up with a mysterious partner named Neil, a charmingly Robert Pattinson, our hero tracks inverted objects to a villainous Russian arms dealer named Andrei Kenneth Bran to get closer to this mega-wealthy madman. The protagonist uses Andrei's wife, Kat Elizabeth the Beep, who loathes her abusive husband, but is being blackmailed into staying with him via threats that she will lose her son if she doesn't do exactly what he says. On a very basic level, Tenet is about the extremes of unmonitored power. When one becomes so rich and powerful that they can literally shape world events, why not try to shape world history too? Sound a little familiar? Andrei is very much cut from the same cloth, a classic Bond villains complete with unchecked opulence, a Russian accent, and snarling line delivery. Blend Nolan's obsession with time-twisting high concepts and his love of classic action construction, and you have some idea what Tenet feels like. However, there's never been a Bond movie so stuffed with expository dialogue. Tenet spends roughly 2 hours of its 150-minute runtime explaining what is happening, why it is happening, and what might happen next. And yet, even with that, it's still incredibly difficult to follow because Nolan goes so far down his own rabbit hole of time travel that one almost needs to take notes to keep up. And I still think it arguably wouldn't all add up if they could. Scene after scene of Washington, Patterson, Brannigan, Debicki trying to convey the plot becomes exhausting, and it's Nolan's biggest mistake. It would have been better to just leave more unsaid and jump chaotically into the film's mood and visual saw instead of so often returning to overanalyzing a plot. Most people still won't be able to follow. At times it feels like a film crafted for YouTube explainer video. Culture. There's already one online that purports to deconstruct the ending, and the movie isn't even out in most of the world. Early in the film, the scientist who explains inversion says, "Don't try to understand, feel it, and I wish Nolan had listened to her more." This touches on another aspect of the so-called Tenet backlash that occurred when this film opened in 2020. At the beginning of the year, before CO became a reality for North American audiences, Nolan's closely guarded action thriller was on the top of most people's must-see lists. But once lockdown scuttled theaters, it was pushed back from its July release date. Undeterred, Nolan seemed determined to figure out a way to get the movie into theaters, rightly or wrongly. There was a general impression that Nolan wanted to be the one who saved the theatrical experience. But was that a sign of arrogance or stubbornness on his part in the midst of a global crisis in which so many were dying? Who really cared about a movie, right? Then I often wondered if that contributed to some people's negative feelings about Tenet. They felt that the film, with its elaborately clever narrative design, just seemed entirely beside the point at a moment of such fear and sorrow. I remember people questioning whether or not he should be releasing the film in that climate, says Schiller. I think those are valid questions for sure, and I don't know if there was really any right answer. The thing that I admired is he saw an industry that he loved dearly, theaters, they really suffering. And he was like, hey, look, if I put this movie out here and I give these theaters something to show, I give people a reason to go back to the movies. maybe other films will follow suit. Where he probably went wrong is there was nothing necessarily set in line with other filmmakers or other studios. Look, we're going to release a Tenet here, you guys, maybe a couple of weeks down the line release. This will give the theaters something to keep them going and off of life support. I think his intentions were in the right place. I know a lot of people were like, hey, he just wants to release the movie because he's got this massive ego, but he was trying to save something that was important to him. Schiller did a traditional review of Tenet, but as time went on, he couldn't stop thinking about the film, especially in a sea of negativity. I was like, hey, let me try and do a little bit more here. He recalls thinking it's a movie that just stuck with me. I was like, and no, man, there's so much more here to dive into. And so in early 2021, he made a video essay incorporating quotes from Nolan and others, including passages from Tom Schoen's 2020 book of The Nolan Variations, the movies, mysteries, and marvels of Christopher Nolan, to make a case for why Tenet should be reappraised. Specifically, he discussed how the film connects to Nolan's childhood passion for James Bond. Film's a passion that Schiller shares. When I talked to Schiller over Zoom, he has a litany of '07 posters behind him, some of them in different languages. Tate, I'm a massive James Bond nerd, he says with a laugh, so I'm just picking up on stuff in this film that I felt was tailor-made for me. My dream project would be for Christopher Nolan to do a James Bond movie. Tenet, to me, is the closest I think we'll ever get to him doing that. I was really excited to see him go out there and create something original that is based on the feelings that he got when he was watching at a spy who loved me when he was a kid. Schiller's love of espionage thrillers and Bond flicks started when he was young, but I become more fascinated the older that I get, just because I think it's a genre that gets better as you get older and have a better understanding of the world and the geopolitical landscape. I grew up watching the Connery films as a kid. They're great. Who doesn't like them? And a Casino Royale came out during a really pivotal time in my life. Casino Royale was a big reason why I love movies as much as I do today. But, yeah, the espionage genre. I liked the characters. I liked how malleable the genre is. You can have a very serious John Lahr copyright type story, and then you could do something like a Moonrake cray. They all feel like they belong in the genre. Most can see the barn-like illusions in Nolan's film. Although even among Tenet fans, there's debate about how worthwhile they are. Chin up in LA. Tells me this is something my friend and I, who both are at the same level of obsession, actually disagree on. He says this is Nolan's James Bond movie, and I'm not James Bond movie. Another person I spoke with, AJ Carmen, 23, also doesn't sound like he's that big of a Bond guy. At one point, as I talked to him over the phone from his work in San Francisco, he describes the protagonist as pretty James Bondic, minus the corniness in the sense that he's basically just trying to save the world. But unlike my other interview subjects, Carmen, who loves Tenet, has never experienced it on the big screen. That's why he can't wait for the re-release. I've always wanted to see it in the theater, he tells me. So now I have 3 different viewings I'm going to. I have a personal one I'm going to, which is by myself, literally no one else. There's one I think that I'm co-hosting at a theater here in San Francisco where a bunch of people I've worked with are seeing it. I've been told I'm giving the presentation after the film. Then there's a third one to be determined. That may be a day. We'll see. If you've been banging the drum for Tenet all these years online, you may recognize Carmen's name and know what he means by the presentation. He first saw the movie when it was available on Amazon, eventually rewatching it about 10 times. It was pretty confusing. He says of his first viewing, I'd say I got 70% of it. And then by the end of the rewatch, I was like, hey, I think I get 95% of it. But Carmen went viral early this year in connection to Jan Sherman, the Peloton instructor who became famous after Nolan jokingly mentioned at the New York Film Critics Circuit Awards banquet where he was being celebrated for Oppenheimer that he had been doing a workout when all of a sudden Sherman randomly ripped on Tenet, a saying that's a couple of hours of my life I'll never get back. The internet eventually tracked down Sherman, leading Toa some good-natured joking around on all sides. But in the midst of it all, Carmona tweeted something extraordinary. A girl I was going out with asked me to make a PowerPoint explaining Tenet. I did. I've used it on 3 other dates since then. Whenever Tenet confusion comes up, the tweet quickly started blowing, "There was a girl I was trying to impress." He tells me when I ask about the origins of this presentation, she made a joke about, "Hey, Dan, hey." Oh, well, you love it enough to where you'd make a PowerPoint for it. So I was like, hey, actually, yeah, I would do that. A few days later, she came over and we shared wine. I pretended to be a drunk professor and presented this silly PowerPoint slide of the movie. The slides are quite bad. They don't really do much explaining of the film. It's really just a recap of the whole thing. His original tweet went up on January 4th. There was such demand to see the PowerPoint that a day later he put up all 29 slides. A few days after that, he upped the ante, posting video of a first D he went on, in which he showed his date to Harpria by Great the printed out slide so he could talk to her about Tenet. She had seen the movie, but she didn't know she was being recorded. That video also went viral, with some commenters praising the wholesomeness of their good-natured back and forth, while others accusing Carmen of mansplaining. Personally, I lean toward those in the former camp. Bug clearly has a ball. Dunking on this guy, seriously, how many slide does she have to look at? And the two of them really enjoy getting into discussing the ins and outs of Tenet. I was terrified, he says, of staging the surreptitious video shoot. I make a lot of video and film for my job, but I'm always on the other end of the camera. I like that. I don't really enjoy being on the front end of it, especially when it's about me. You know that it's going to go viral because of the context. It's very nerve-wracking. Carmen had decided not to tell Buggery in advance so that her reaction to his nerdy presentation could be authentic. But he knew ahead of time he wasn't going to do anything with the video unless he got her blessing. We wanted to try to make a little piece of modern art, he says, before stopping himself. I know that sounds so conceited, but we wanted to try to keep it real, whether that meant naturally funny moments or naturally awkward moments. I realized that not telling her ahead of time would be a good way to approach that, but it was pretty nerve-wracking for me because I was like, hey, that's sketchy. But I thought, hey, I'm a good dude. If she becomes uncomfortable with it, the footage is getting deleted. But I just knew her from Twitter and in person, and I was like, hey, I think she'll think it's hilarious and great. Not only was Buggery cool with it, she went back to Carmen's place with the people who shot the video so that they could all watch and edit it together. Me and my roommates and her and the 2 guys that helped me film it all came over and just cracked up at the full 40 minutes of uncut footage, he says, laughing. 12. People just sat in a room, and we all made code-aerial decisions on what parts were funny, what parts weren't. He and Buggery are friends. They've donated joint interviews about the experience. But I was curious if the viral video helped get him dates with other women. A third of the total comments from the whole experience were like, hey, oh my gosh, this guy's DMs are going to be flooded. There's going to be so many women interested in him because it really displays nerdiness and care in a fine way that's unique. Carmen laughs. I got a total of 4 DMs from interested women for. What I've learned is that when women go viral, they get tons of DMs from guys, but I did go on one of those dates with someone, and it was really a fun date, a quality person and a very, very smart person. I was like, maybe that was a good quality filter for smart, nerdy, meticulous folks. But it didn't work at a high quantity level because my 5 interview subjects are men, and the loudest Nolan fans online also seem to be men, as some may wonder if there's something inherent in the director's movies that lend themselves to be fixated on by guys. Sweeping statements about gender are reductive and stupid, and I know plenty of women who adore Nolan's movies, but it's tempting to think in broad stereotypes. Associating men with the love of intricate riddles, they can brag about solving a brain measuring contest. If you will, while women are less interested in intellectual, or if you're less charitable, self-absorbed, brooding, action movies pretending to be about grand themes, cinematic exercises. When I put this question to my subjects, they struggle to explain why more of their male friends got into Nolan's one. Movies. As Maui puts it, I think everybody that I know that had a girlfriend that would have seen I don't think any of them were remotely interested in A, but all the guys were like, this is the greatest thing ever. But if you want to use another broad reductive gender stereotype, suggesting that men don't like films that are emotional, these 5 men will surprise you. And many of them talked about a personal, visceral connection. They have to Tenet. I cried at least twice watching it, Carmen says, and I don't cry a lot. The ending, when Neil and the protagonist say goodbye to one another, almost brings him to tears. But it's really the moments where the protagonist has just the quickest moment of am I going to do this? Crazy thing. I'm about to save the world. It's one thing to run into a burning building, It's quite a thing. Actually, But it's a whole another thing to run into the burning building and not know what is going to happen. There's something about moving into action for the benefit of someone you're trying to save. That's deeply emotional to me, that just gets me. For Carmen, that feeling connects to the work he does. He aspires to be a filmmaker like his heroes Nolan and the George Lucas. But during the work week, I am the head of content at the satellite company called Astrones. If you're one of the 4 billion people who have no internet connection and you can't afford it, our satellites are tailor-made for you. Then, on the weekends, I do a weekly web series with an emphasis in cinematic documentary film. Making about people who are building other tech things like Astrones is to try to change the world with technology for the better. The idea of helping others, whether it's the protagonist or himself, is something that's important to Carmen. My personal life philosophy is to do the most with my life, he tells me. He considers himself incredibly fortunate. Being born in a state in a country that's financially well off, I wanted work that would help the rest of men. The world who don't have certain things, like clean water, consistent food, a safe place to live, the internet, and bring that to reality. But the film's exploration of time travel has also stayed with him, changing the way he thinks about his purpose. In particular, he's focused on one line. We know a Dimple Capia's arms dealer. Priyu says that really we're all communicating with the future. Emails, credit cards, texts, anything that goes into the record speaks directly to the future. Carmen believes time travel is a reality, and we should think more about its daily implications. The stupid thing I just tweeted is going to be seen by my great-great-great-great-grandchildren one day in a way that normally maybe something like that never would have been seen. He says, I think more about time travel than the rest of the other big questions of fate, luck, is there a God things. Of this nature for China, the protagonist's blackness resonates, especially because it's never commented on internet. In China's viral video, he delves into this aspect of the movie, commenting how refreshing it is to have a black hero in a studio blockbuster, whose race has nothing to do with who he is as a character. As an actor of color, China finds that encouraging. I'm half white, half Jia, he says. I haven't looked onto my genealogy very much, but it's like Indo-Jian and Afro-Jian. I found this part of his video especially illuminating, shining a light on how movie fandom can be intensely personal. But I told him that although the protagonist's race is never brought up, in a sense, I wondered if it is. Quite often, our hero is underestimated by the white characters he encounters. The protagonist is told that he's out of his depth trying to navigate this world of spycraft, leading me to wonder if their lack of respect from him was partly based on racism. Was Nolan very subtly suggesting that China takes a shine to that theory, in part because it connects with his own feeling of first seeing Tenet in Glasgow, a city full of white people? I was watching it and feeling a disconnect and missing Toronto. One of the reasons I came back to Toronto was to be around the multiculturalism. The protagonist is like, hey, everyone seems to think I'm not getting it. And to be fair, he doesn't get it, but he has the capability to get a T. And then it turns out he's smarter than all of them because in the future, he's the boss. In their own way, each of my 5 interview subjects have helped sing the film's praises, keeping it alive in the cultural consciousness despite not being as popular as Nolan's blockbusters, but they don't feel much ownership of Tenet and are pleased if their online contributions help turn new people onto the film or change their mind about the movie. Speaking about his brief viral moment, Carmen says, a fear is that I've somehow maybe ruined a Tenet for people. But all in all, his fleeting internet celebrity turned out okay. Your coworkers and old teachers text you out of the blue. They're like, hey, oh my God, you're on Twitter. Then everyone forgets about it and you move on with your life, and it's wonderful. If there's a way to be famous, it's this. That said, he did get a kick out of recently meeting a new coworker. He's like, hey, you're the Tenet guy. Do you want to get lunch? We can just talk about a Tenet. We're doing that next week. Hey, I think that's pretty cool. Tenet will always be associated with the pandemic. Part of the film's legacy, connected to cover, and Nolan's attempts mocked by some to get his movie into theaters. Arguably, Tenet didn't get a fair shake because of all the baggage around it at the time. But even if there hadn't been a lockdown, Schiller believes the film would be divisive just by virtue of the weirdness of it. The movie's plot is a lot to grasp on an initial viewing, and when the film came out during the pandemic, people weren't going to go back for a second viewing. And this is a film that demands repeat viewings. Of course, there are people who kept going back happy to relive the protagonist's journey again and again. But although the pandemic is over, some of those fans can't entirely separate the lockdown from the experience of watching Tenet. I remember when and where I saw most movies for the first time, says Jansen, so a part of me will always associate a Tenet with the pandemic and the real-world factors that informed its release. Obviously, many people opted not to see it in its initial theatrical run. So I would hope, particularly after the phenomenon of Oppenheimer, audiences are more willing to take the leap, and its legacy can be defined more by how it continues to be appreciated over time by fans and doubters alike. Even today, watching Tenet makes chime up and think about the cover era. The characters wear those masks, which is a really evocative image. He says, and that takes me back. The film also reflects how weird it felt at that time. It's one of those rare moments where a piece of art happened to mean something that it completely did not intend to, but just fundamentally culturally does, which is kind of beautiful. Funny enough, despite seeing Tenet 15 times during its initial release, Mui has never revisited it since. I've watched scenes, he says, but I haven't sat down and watched the film in its entirety at home. It's so ingrained in my head from those theater experiences. It has to be that. That's why I'm really excited for this re-release, because I can relive that. This is how I know Tenet. That's going to be great. But it also makes Maui think about how much has changed in those 4 years, not just in terms of the pandemic, but also for himself. Life was definitely different. He tells me in Missouri stuff was shut down, but not entirely. Back then I was 23 years old. I lived with my parents. I didn't have bills. I had no other obligations to do anything. So I just went and saw Tenet as many times as I could. I had nothing else to spend my money on. I had nowhere else that I could really go. A Tenet was really my comfort food during the pandemic, especially in the early woes of it. He wonders if those memories will come back to him when he returns to Tenet in the theater, even though he now lives in Los Angeles to follow his ambitions to be a composer. I'll probably have flashbacks of what my life was and dreaming of being in LA. He says, because that was always the goal, we measures the distance between now and then. I remember exactly what seat bat I always sat in at that theater in Street Louis, and that's going to be a completely different experience being in LA. I think it'll bring me back to those times, which for me were good. The pandemic was bad as a whole, but I had a lot of fun with it. London, maybe it is our collective enslavement to the superhero industrial complex, but right now the movie world is looking for a savior. If it turns out to be Christopher Nolan, it wouldn't be the first-time films of his like Inception, Interstellar, and Dunkirk have in years. Past saved Summers, Reputation Studios, his Dark Knight trilogy, sure, saved the Warner Brothers DC partnership. In fact, possibly he saved that a bit too hard with franchise filmmakers ever since toiling in his shadow. Can Nolan save cinema from the coronavirus, its deadliest foe yet? Perhaps if COVID-19 can be tripped up by the grandfather paradox or has a hitherto undiscovered weakness for sharp tailoring. The hotly anticipated opening August 26th in some international territories on September 3rd in the United States is reassuringly massive in every way except thematically ideally presented in 70mm Ryx Nolan's preferred towering aspect ratio array with the telegenic faces of a cast of incipient superstars gorgeously shot across multiple global locations and pivoting on an elastic time-bending conceit. More on that later/earlier. The film is undeniably enjoyable, but its giddy grandiosity only serves to highlight the brittliness of its purported braininess. This would hardly be a criticism of any other blockbuster, but Nolan is by several exploding football fields the foremost outer of the intellectual, which combines popcorn-dropping visual ingenuity with all the sedate satisfactions of a medium-grade Sudoku. Within the context of this self-created brand of brainiac entertainment, Tenet meets all expectations except the expectation that it will exceed them. Forgive the circularity of this argument. It's a side effect of watching the defiantly circular Tenet with unforeseen irony. The film, which will largely be shown in limited capacity theaters, begins in a packed auditorium. It is an opera house in Chi that is being held up. One of the attackers, superbly played by John David Washington, reveals himself to be a CIA agent who has infiltrated the operation to rescue an asset. When a curious thing happens, a bullet fired by an unknown ally reverses out of a nearby seat. The wood around the bullet holds splintering. Scarcely has the agent time to wonder pale androically, when he is distracted by having to save hundreds of civilians from certain death. We are a scant few minutes into the film's 2A half-hour runtime, and it has already delivered. The sequence ends with interior and exterior shots of a nape explosion, which the editor Jennifer Lame transforms with as perfect an action cut as ever there was. In that microcond, we're reminded of something the last few months have conspired to make us forget. Cinematic scale 10, it operates on a physiological level in the stomach pit rumbles of Faladwig Gerson. Score and the dilated pupil responses to Hoivanoy team's cinematography, which delivers the same magnificence, whether observing a narratively superfluous cat and Moran race, or the nap and weave of Jeffrey Kurland's immaculately creaseless costumes. Seriously, the most mind-boggling aspect of Tenet might be the ironing budget. Washington's unnamed character is quickly inducted into the mysteries of inversion, a process by which an object A or a person A can have its entropy reversed, making it appear to those of us moving lamely forward through time as if it is spooling backward. His new inversion-related mission leads him first to a fixer, Neil, a delightful Robert Pattinson, useful for both his action shops and his masters in physics. Then to a Mumbai arms dealer, Dimple Kapadia, whose fortress apartment can only be accessed by bungee jump. And then to the villainous Ukrainian squatter Andrei Sader. Kenneth Branagh, who can only be accessed via his wife Kat Elizabeth to beep a miserable imperiled art dealer who loads him for once. Spoiler sensitivity might be the reviewer's luckiest break. absolving me of even attempting an explanation of a plot so contorted it's best not to worry about it. Even the scientist played by CLA, till the copyright man's poet, the copyrights, I, here exclusively to deliver exposition, eventually cops out, don't try to understand it, feel it is the best advice anyone offers. Suffice to say the time inversion idea is most impressive, not in this film's grander architecture, which, as widely surmised, loosely resembles a palindrome, but in single scenes in which some elements run forward while others reverse, similar to Inception, which created an entire dream world mythology only to have a revolving hallway silly become its most iconic sequence. In it, time inversion poses a civilization annihilating threat, but the killer scene is again a quarter fight. We see it twice, and each time after your brain clicks to one of the combatants fighting forward in time, while the other goes backward. The sheer how did they do that ingenuity is dazzling. Tenet dazzles the senses, but it does not move. The heart of criticism common to all of Nolan's original films. Another widely recognized Nolan blind spots are also in evidence. It's depressing that as fine an actress as the Big should be saddled with such a cipher role, given a son in lie of a character, and made responsible for the story's only bad decisions. Everyone else performs to perfection, especially Washington's historyless protagonist, who proves that not all superheroes wear capes. Some wear the hell out of suits so dapper that one of the film's biggest laughs comes when Nolan talisman Michael Caine glances at Washington, looking better in his dark blue ensemble than possibly any human man has ever looked, and sneers Britishly. Brooks Brothers is not going to cut it. Image Washington is basically James Bond forward and backward, a kind of 070, right down to the occasional wry one-liner, and if it takes me star who is meant to be able to memorably inhabit so vaporous a role, he is also blessed to be playing off an equally unflammable patterns and other chemistry rather than the sexless semi-flirtation between Washington's hero and the Beak's damsel. Gives the film whatever romance it has, but it's not just lack of heart that holds Tenet back. Nolan imagines impossible technologies but won't explore their deeper implications. This is frustrating because in Brand Sater, at the film's most multifaceted character, even if all the facets are malevolent, gets so close. Sador's motivation in bringing the future to war with the past has chilling ramifications, and maybe it's the nihilism of these pandemic-era post-nap times, but it sets up an unsatisfied desire to the worst-case scenario unfold. Instead, at the moment of maximum potential chaos, Nolan retreats to the relative safety of spy movie convention. Indeed, take away the time-bending gimmick, and Tenet is a series of timidly generic set pieces, heists, car chases, bomb disposals, more heists. But then the lie of Nolan's career has been that he makes the traditionally teenage boy aimed blockbuster smarter and more adult, when what he really does is ennobble the teenage boy fixations many of us adults still cherish, creating vast, sizzling conceptual landscapes in which anyone really does crack saves and blow stuff up. But gosh, does he blow stuff up? Good, and that's not nothing right now when it is probably scale and explosions and complex stunts rather than deep meaning. That will be what gets Corona-she moviegoers to brave the multiplex. Perhaps Tenet can even provide a nostalgic glimpse of who we were just months ago on the other side of our own weird experiment in time. At one point, Cedar's yacht is moored off the Amalfi coast near Pompeii City, petrified as the height of its decadence by a volcanic explosion it could not see coming. So, seems then it the kind of hugely expensive, blissfully empty spectacle it is difficult to imagine getting made in the near to medium future. Now a fascinating artifact of a lovably clueless civilization unaware of the disaster lurking around the corner. Seek it out, if only to marvel at the entertainingly inane glory of what we once had and are in danger of never having again. Well, that and the suits. For some of his fans, this narrative is Sada is exactly what they're looking for. But I prefer emotional registers in my Nolan that he seems only casually interested in here. The stakes don't feel as high as Dunkirk. The maze construction isn't as thrilling as Inception, and even the characters don't feel as easy to invest Tina as Interstellar, almost as if he knows his puzzle box is ice cold. Nolan adds the subplot about Kat losing her son, but it's so underdeveloped that I don't think her kid even has a line. The kid is as much of a device as an inverted bullet. If Tenet can be a hard movie to engage with emotionally or even comprehend narratively, that doesn't take away from its craftsmanship on a technical level. It's an impressive film simply to experience, bombarding the viewer with bombastic sound design and gorgeous widescreen cinematography by Hud van Hoyema. The movie never sags in terms of technical elements and even performance. Everyone is committed to Nolan's runway speed. Van Hoyema's work is vibrant. Jennifer Lame's editing is tight, and the performances are all good to great. In particular, Pattinson really shines in a playful register that he's not often allowed to use. The decision to release Tenet in theaters instead of VOD was controversial for many reasons. But there's no denying that Tenet was conceived by Nolan to be an experience that shouldn't be paused and needs to be projected with a speaker system turned up to 11. Even if that would have still been true if Warner Brothers had delayed the film until it was safer to see it, I almost got the sense that playing Tenet at a lower volume, or even pausing it at home to take a break, might reveal its flaws. Nolan doesn't want you to be able to dissect IDA or be distracted by your big phone while you watch it. The irony is that he doesn't want you to be able to rewind it. A 108 is a movie about momentum reflected both in its narrative and its aesthetic, and more cracks would show without it. A viewer response to Tenet will come down to how much one engages with that momentum. I expect a surprising number of people will open the door and jump out of this moving race car. Look, another palindrome A before it crosses the finish line, exhausted by a story that doesn't make sense even as it's trying to explain itself to you. Others will embrace the filmmaking's energy, which starts with intensity and doesn't let up much at die. All. The word I kept thinking of was one I used earlier in this review, aggressive view that may sound like high. Praise to Nolan fans looking for something other than a lazy, predictable blockbuster, and harsh criticism to those who aren't looking to be left weary by a self-serious sci-fi epic in the spirit of a film about objects moving opposite ways in time in the same space. Maybe both groups are right. Like so many teenagers who started developing a fledgling interest in cinema in the early 2010s, I was part of the huge wave washed ashore at the altar of Christopher Nolan's filmography. Unquestionably, I was hyped for Tenet, after spending months in a lull with no hopes of watching it anytime soon. When I finally got the chance, I wanted to love it so much. I longed for the dopamine and the adrenaline that comes packaged with a Nolan bill. Instead, it was a rush of disappointment in spades. Let's start with the good stuff. A lovely G8 Phil Ranson score is a thunderous achievement. His bass-heavy score, layered with pounding percussions and 8-string guitars, create a sense of urgency that does a huge service to the film, giving it a much-needed sense of rhythm. More on that later. Having won accolades for his work on Black Panther, The Mandalorian, and with Donald Glover as Childish Gambino, he is already one of my favorite composers working today. Fight choreography is something Nolan's detractors have used against him since the Batman trilogy. Tenet marks a massive step up from his days of directing The Caped Crusader. The hand-to-hand combats are gripping and adeptly shot. Hoyma is at his usual best, too. Everything looks crisp and the camera moves deliciously through the intricate and immaculate set pieces. Even in the dialogue-heavy scenes, the cinematography never leaves you wanting more. Finally, this may feel like banging the drum for an nth time, but Robert Pattinson is once again great, and his chemistry with the film's lead, John David Washington, is a saving grace. In the last 2 decades, Nolan has established himself as one of the very few directors who can make big budget summer tentpoles, yet enjoy the creative freedom often associated with indie movies. This freedom both artistic and monetary, has catapulted him to a status enjoyed by the likes of Spielberg and Cameron, and I'd argue that he has justified his right to be up there, sticking to his guns and constantly evolving and improving himself over the years. This is why when Tenet missteps and misfires, the disappointment runs even higher. The plot itself is not too strange. A CIA agent undergoes a test for his loyalty and is employed by a top-secret organization. Their mission to save the world. This is where Nolan decides to indulge in his obsessions with time and infuses his trademark time travel shenanigans. What this leads to is Nolan attempting to tell a simple, straightforward story with all the makings for an exciting spy thriller in an overbearingly convoluted way, which unfortunately fails to break any new grounds in the genre. What's worse is if you look past the facade of all the physics and all the chemistry involved, this is the first Nolan film which, instead of treating its viewers as intelligent, tries to entrap them in a false sense that they're watching high art. Because when you distill Tenet down to, well, it's Tenets, it has no more in substance than you're a James Bond or Mission Impossibles, and that's not nowhere near a bad thing. A Sam Mendes and Christopher McQuarrie have given us some of the best action spy movies in recent years in the form of those two franchises. But Tenet wants to be more, and in trying to be more, it ends up being neither a satisfactory action thriller nor an engaging cerebral exercise. Au contrary, it's closer to a Michael Bay outing, but without his style and charisma. The characters strike as wooden pieces, regurgitating robotic dialogues and trying too hard to evoke some sort of empathy from the audience. John David Washington is a fine actor, but he does not have much to work with. He's not even given a name, only referred to as the protagonist. Ironically, for almost the entirety of the movie, he's in the same boat as the audience and fed with exposition. A passenger, more protagonist less, Kenneth. Brick plays the villain. Andrei Sater with a horrible Russian accent. He was probably too occupied with focusing on his Belgian accent for A Death on the Nile. Sater fits the cliché, a copyright for a classic Bond villain, a Russian arms dealer with a god complex in possession of a futuristic tech device and holding a demo captive. Unfortunately, he's employed merely as a lethargic and trip plot device, and what we get is a shoddy one-dimensional antagonist in a movie made by the director who gave us Ledger's Joker. The emotional centerpiece of Tenet is Kat, played by Elizabeth Debicki. Let's face it, Nolan is not known for writing strong female characters, and this is his latest in a long line of transgressions. We are supposed to care for Kat and her son, yet we do not see this relation play out once on screen. There is barely any notable interaction between the two. Instead, we irate again and again of his importance to Kat when a single meaningful scene would have sufficed. All this comes off as lazy writing at best, cringeworthy at its worst. Thing is, not many people would agree that making emotional films is a strong suit. For Nolan, anyway. But I've always felt that while his stories are more plot-driven, he succeeds in imbibing his characters with gravities. There's always a sense of sincerity and razor-sharp motivations driving them. No matter how structured Nolan be in his approach, he consistently succeeds in landing enough emotional depth to the story for the audience to attach to. What baffles me is how did he fail in this crucial aspect of writing now in the prime of his career? This brings me to the biggest flaw of Tenet, the lack of rhythm. There are no shifts in momentum. The movie starts with everything dialed to a 10 and forgets to change gears forever, leaving no room to gut breath. Most of the characters the movie so badly wants us to care about do not get any establishing scenes. And if they do, it's in the form of undignified dialogues embarrassingly reminiscent of Suicide Squad. So this is Katana. She's got my back. Hell, I did not know why anyone was doing what they were doing half the time, other than being told that if our heroes fail, the world would somehow end. Ergo 10, it becomes a hard film to follow, not because of its crazy temporal concepts, but because it does not bother with giving you any context for the scenes. 15 minutes into the movie, there is a massive exposition dump which lasts for barely a couple of minutes before it is hastily wrapped up with the words, "Don't try to understand, just feel it." I don't know if this is a barefaced smirk to the audience, but I wish Nolan had taken his own advice and tried to feel the flow of the film rather than getting engulfed in its intrepid minations. As Tenet rolled into credits, I pined for the satisfaction I had experienced when I walked out of Dunkirk. Whereas Dunkirk was cinema stripped to its most basic form and served with a touch of Chris Nolan's magic, Tenet appears to be a script written by someone consumed with fine-tuning the details in between the lines before they've even finished writing the lines. Even in his information-heavy films as The Prestige or Inception, Nolan's proved that he has the capacity to balance the barrage of content and the emotional aspects which hold the film together. It's not always pretty, but it's almost always fun. In Tenet, the expositions and the payoffs are so boring and tedious that for the first time in a Nolan film, I don't even feel compelled to figure out the puzzle he's trying to present. The best way I can sum up this review is by alluding to Aurors, the ancient Greek symbol of a snake eating its own tail. It's a mark for the endless loop of birth, death, and rebirth, often used as a metaphor in time travel stories. It's almost paradoxical, then, that this could also be used as an allegory for Nolan's obsessions and indulgences, which have served him so well in the past, end up devouring him this time around. There is no denying of the sheer technical wizardry on display in Tenet, nor is there any denying of the fact that I'm glad Nolan got to make the movie he wanted to make. I just hope that the next stage in his career, like the Aurors, is a revival and not a drawn-out deceased. The world as we know it is threatened by a technology that can invert objects. John David Washington's nameless protagonist is a CIA agent that has to uncover the plot, together with fellow agent Neil Robert Pattinson, Russian oligarch and arms dealer Cedar. Kenneth Branagh is the antagonist, and he's got his wife, Kat Elizabeth, the Debicki, under his abusive thumb dot. It's a globe-drawing and fast-paced action movie with a cool concept. It's executed well in some areas, but it falls short in other. I loved a lot of fat in it, but I find the flaws more glaring the more I think about it. The opening sequence, featuring an attack on the Ukrainian National Opera, is a set piece to behold. The tension is gripping, and it doesn't let go. Nolan throws you that right into the action, and it's up to the viewer to make sense of what transpires. I grasped most of the plot, but you will probably walk out of the cinema pondering its details. It's a film that will benefit from a second viewing. Nolan is so ambitious that his ambitions sometimes get in the way of the characters in the script. The same can be said for Interstellar, a movie that dazzled me with its visions of space and time, but felt contrived and flat in its approach to the characters. Despite some great acting from Matthew McConaughey, can feel sterile at times, and I'd have wanted the movie to dig a little deeper into the characters' motivations and relationships. The comparisons to Inception are many, and even though that move was also very high concept, it succeeded in telling a more personal story. A 1080 has an arc too, but it's not as pronounced. It's telling that John David Washington's character is simply referred to as the protagonist. He's suave and the right kind of cocky. He has a range that he gets to display but we never get to settle in him as a character as the movie barrels along. Instead, it's Robert Pattinson who steals the show with his charisma. Elizabeth Debicki does the best with what the script offers her, but it's not much. Her character is underwritten, and she has some lines that make you roll your eyes. She's supposed to be the emotional corp, but it feels tacked on. Kenneth Branagh is a lot of fun to watch as a Russian arms dealer who just about manages to not become a complete cliché. It's not that he has any redeeming qualities. He's in a grade bastard day, but Branagh makes him both ruthless and calculating. However, his end goal is too vague, and the movie doesn't really show us the impact that his master plan would have. This dilutes the stakes, and there's not much in the way of personal drama. For a movie with a length of 2.5 hours, it goes by surprisingly fast, maybe too fast. There are many moving parts, which makes it a film that can be hard to follow, not because of any thematic complexity, but rather the intricacies of the inversion concept. Much of the dialogue is expository, and sometimes it's just flat. The problem is that Nolan deals with and probably has a good grasp on complex scientific terms regarding time and space, but he has to explain it to the audience in a way they understand. We're told a lot of stuff, but not shown as much. It's in this showing that Tenet succeeds. The effects, and many of them practical are a joy to behold. The inversion effect is something I haven't seen on screen before, and the choreography is astounding. A certain backward brawl is one of the movie's highlights. It's so well realized, and it gets your mind working. In fact, Tenet has many highlights that make it possible to overlook its flaws. But it's Christopher Nolan we're talking about here. And that's why my expectations are so high as a visual spectacle and fast-paced, smart action movie. A10 works on almost every level. It's a shame that the plot is quite convoluted and that the characterization could have been fleshed out. We don't really get much room to breathe as the film moves forward. It's not a bad thing per se, but here it could have benefited by getting more in-depth. Character motivations are surface level, and the third act is hampered by a so-so twist and a battle with faceless foes. Nolan has always been better at portraying interpersonal conflict like The Prestige than massive battles, making it hard to follow. Also, I'm not loving Levick Gaddi. Pilgro Ranson's score as much as some are. Even though he's a Swede, he manipulates sounds to great effect, but it's a bit overwhelming. It doesn't always work in tandem with what's happening on screen. Plus, the mix is too loud, and if I hadn't had subtitles, I would have had a hard time hearing what the characters were saying. I'd have preferred something a bit more subtle. Tenet is a technical marvel. There's no way around it. In flaunt, spectacular set pieces, gorgeous locations, superb cinematography courtesy of H. Van Hoyma, and next-level action choreography. However, the plot is modeled in the characters' lack depth. It shares the flaws of fanception that I really like, and the Interstellar in that it has too much exposition. It's a fast-paced movie, but it's not always to its benefit. Nolan's ambition and technical mastery should be lauded, but there's something about the movie that doesn't carry it all the way. It's a combination of some bad dialogue, a reliance on MacGuffins, flat characters, and a hurried third act. That doesn't make it a bad movie, just not Nolan's best. The world is about to end, and the time is ticking, but backwards, well, for most part, writer, director, Christopher Nolan's mysterious magnum opus is a film full of an eventuality that feels quite surreal in the precarious times we live in. A 10. It opens with a bang as a packed National Opera House in Kiev is invaded and is about to be blown to bits. This is a precursor to quite a few such instances that infuse a dose of action and excitement, even when the film's rather convoluted plot might bog you down. But that said, the overarching idea of its plot is fairly simple. It's about saving the world from an insanely powerful Russian arms dealer and trade Kenneth Branagh, who could go back and forth in time. Now, the idea is to beat him at his own game. But in execution, a Tenet is every bit the high concept make-believe and far-fetched flight of imagination that blends action, adventure, and intrigue, and Christopher Nolan manages to use many of these opportunities quite effectively. Our hero, John David Washington, known only as the protagonist, is explained the concept of a temporal inversion and sent off on a top-secret mission to save the world. He is joined by his British counterpart, Neil Robert Pattinson, whose origins remain a mystery throughout. The mission takes him places including Mumbai, where he breaks into a wealthy arms dealer's house for information where his wife Priya Dimple Kapadia gives him cryptic leads that cannot always be trusted. But it's only when he meets and Ray's estranged wife, Cat Elizabeth, the Debicki, that he realizes the full potential of Vi. Just how complex and diabolical the situation is. but the film screenplay keeps underlining and explaining its layered plot about technology that can reverse time. Thankfully, it does so with stunning cinematography, H. Van Hoya, and action-packed scenes that are executed with a natural flair and finesse. The idea of going back in time, where everything moves in reverse, creates a visually appealing imagery, and the original background score, Luig G8. Philro Ranson is so unique and immersive that it builds just the right amount of urgency and tension. Everyone is quite tappily cast, including Dimple Kapadia, who lends a certain gravitas to her enigmatic character of a powerful Indian woman. She would much rather offer her husband's assassin a drink and date, pacify him than panic at the sudden breaking. Her role is not only crucial, but also quite fascinating in the way she deals with the protagonist. Robert Pattinson is charming, but remains strictly in a supporting role, never overshadowing the protagonist, played quite effectively by John David Washington. John's brooding persona and no-nonsense dialogue delivery is impactful. Elizabeth Debicki is honest in her part as an abused wife held to ransom by her chauvinist husband, but could have been more convincingly written. Kenneth Branagh's character of Andrei is quite the caricature of a Russian mafioso with a typical accent and snarling dialogue delivery. Just like most Nolan films, this one too demands full attention from its viewer. Yet there is no guarantee you will comprehend the film's nuanced narrative in its totality. But that doesn't take away from enjoying the cinematic experience of Nolan's vivid imagination that is skillfully portrayed on the big screen. The secret to enjoy a Tenet lies in what a scientist who is explaining and version tells the protagonist. Don't try to understand. Feel it. People who love Tenet tend to have a story about the first time they saw it. So, let's start with mine. I didn't catch a Christopher Nolan's 2020 film in theaters. Hey, I live in Los Angeles, where there were tight restrictions. So it wasn't until the movie became available for purchase digitally months later that I finally was able to check out my most anticipated movie of that year. I've been a fan of Nolan's for a while. Ever since I'd been dazzled by his sophomore feature, Memento A, and I was especially curious to see what he'd done. After Dunkirk, the best film of 2017, but by the time I got to Tenet, I'd heard the negative buzz, how it was a disappointment, a needlessly complicated and convoluted pseudo-spy thriller that involved time travel. Reviewers are often rapturous about a new Nolan film, but that hadn't been the case here at The Word, was that the Oscar-nominated director, arguably the most prestigious of modern blockbuster filmmakers, had laid an egg. So rather than being excited, I was mostly wary, hoping for the best, but fearing the worst. When I finally sat down to watch Tenet, I got a bunch of both awesome, incredible action sequences, but also a storyline that was nearly impossible to follow. Practically a vanguard in its narrative structure, the movie was ambitious but also muddled, leaving me admiring the attempt but forced to admit it wasn't one of his strongest efforts. Oh well, even the greats don't always deliver the goods, but then something happened. Tenet stayed with me. I hadn't loved it, but I'd liked it, intrigued by the pieces that didn't quite fit, and curious to put them together in my mind. Perhaps there was more to the film than I had realized. There was obviously an intelligence at work. Hey, maybe I needed to apply my own to fully understand what Nolan had achieved. We live in a culture in which you don't have to wait long for movies to go from being labeled a dud to being hailed as a masterpiece. Jennifer's Body was savaged by critics and died at the box office. Say it's now a cult classic. A Simple Favor underperformed. Now there's talk of a sequela because of the rabid fan base that sprung up around the film. Babylon was one of 2022's biggest commercial bombs. So why does it have sellout screenings when it shows up at revival theaters? If a movie you adore was pillared when it came out, just give it a moment and the internet will resurrect it soon enough. But Tenet is a special case, again, released during the height of when most new movies of any discernible quality were being delayed. The film received mixed reviews by Nolan standards and made only about 365 million worldwide. It reportedly cost north of 200 million, meaning that because theaters usually collect about half of a film's grosses, this was his first movie in forever that didn't turn a profit. And yet on Friday, Tenet returns to theaters, available in 70 millimeters, and D-Max, serving as 2024's first major event release a week before Dune. Part steals most of those screens. Hey, this is exciting news for exhibitors who haven't had much to be cheery about so far this glum box office season, but it's especially thrilling for the people who were on board with Tenet from the very start. Critics and general audiences may have been chilly to the film. A check around online and you'll see plenty of everyday moviegoers who thought Tenet was boring or confusing. But there's also been a dedicated fan base that has been preaching the gospel of this movie for years on YouTube, on Twitter, on Reddit, on TikTok. They have delivered them passion testimonials, reaching out to like-minded souls while also hoping to convert those who haven't yet seen the light. For them, this weekend is validation and a victory lap. Each of them has their own story about how they first saw Tenet. Ben Chapin, 28, was living in Glasgow, an actor who had studied at the Royal Conservator of Scotland. He had moved to London before the pandemic hit. I was in a terrible place in a really boring neighborhood in London, he tells me over Zoom. From Toronto, I was like, hey, I hate this. So I just went back to Glasgow to my old student apartment. His place was in the middle of the city. And so when Tenet came out, as a Nolan fan, he was looking forward to checking it out. But when Shine Up and got to the theater, masked up, there was almost no one there. There's multiple reasons why someone might not go to the cinema during that time, he says. But I remember thinking, hey-oh, this is going to bomb, isn't it? Many of the film's biggest fans loved Tenet from the start. A China Up and was not one of them. I really was kind of mad about it, he admits. I remember being like, hey, wow, this is inscrutable. This is on a new level of his complexity. That's certainly how reviewers felt too. Whenever a film that did not open to thunder salvation and gaudy grosses gets reevaluated, writers tend to oversell how unloved that film was. So let the record show that then it in fact got a mostly favorable reviews. It's just that it didn't receive the sort of best movie of the year raves that usually accompany a Nolan film. In his 3 star review for RogerEbert.com, Brian Tolico summed up a lot of our initial feelings when he wrote, "It is 100% designed as an experience for people who have unpacked films like a Prestige and a Memento late into the night, hoping to give Nolan fans more to chew on than ever before. More certainly seems to be the operating principle of 8, even if the chewing can get exhausting. For those who don't remember or never could figure out what the hell was going on, this is a short plot description of Tenet. A John David Washington plays a CIA operative identified only as the protagonist who is recruited by a shadow organization calling itself Tenet. His mission is to stop a dangerous Russian baddie named Sator. Kenneth Branagh, who is communicating with the future with the help of Neil Robert Pattinson and Sator's estranged wife, Kat Elizabeth, the protagonist will try to prevent Sator from destroying the world that seems simple enough, but the movie is far more complicated than that, dealing with entropy inversion and temporal pincer movements as a character advises the protagonist in a line that has become a totem for the film's fans. They don't try to understand it, feel it. Do someone who loves Nolan's movies, China found himself sorting through his feelings after his first screening. I was definitely disappointed, he recalls. I don't know if I was ever angry because I didn't feel like crushing disappointment, but I just had this inkling of, this must make sense, so I should go see it again. So I saw it a week or two later. Even after the movie was no longer in theaters, he kept watching it, trying to fully comprehend the experience. I didn't even fully understand it until I think it was the 6th time when I specifically watched it with subtitles, where I was like, hey, I get it. Chapin's journey to getting Tenet started with an image that had stayed with him, that of the protagonist on the back of a red fire truck at the start of the film's most inventive chase sequence. It became one of the key aspects of a 17-minute video he made in the summer of 2021 entitled Tenet, a misunderstood masterpiece, in which he shared his enthusiasm for the film and argued that it wasn't a failure just because it had violated certain narrative rules or wasn't emotional. That latter criticism, by the way, really annoys Tenet fans, but more on that in a second. What prompted him to make the video, which has logged to date 2.2 million views, was, according to him, other viewers' fundamental unwillingness to understand the movie or engage with it in an actual productive way. Anytime. A filmmaker who's done really well then makes a bold, clearly different kind of film, like they're not a stupid person. They didn't just wake up one day and be like, hey, I'm going to do something dumb. They obviously put thought into it, so it's like trust the reputation, I engage with it. Here's a way that I've found to engage with it. But China also had another motivation. Everything's so toxic and terrible after pandemic was raging. And I was like, hey, here's a fun little game you can play at home right now with this movie that maybe you had a bad experience with. It's like you meet a person, have a really bad first impression with them, and then you hang out with them in a completely different context, and you're like, hey, I love this guy. You have a new friend now, and the world is chin up and laugh self-deprecatingly as he describes his mindset. He has an easy sense of humor and a nerdy sweetness, qualities that he shares with the other 4 people I spoke with for this piece. As a Nolan fan, I sometimes lament a certain type of Nolan bro that you encounter online, as a sort of territorial mansplaining bully who treats the director's films as sacred texts, as the only example of true cinema. These jerks make the rest of us look bad, such as when they memorably complained before Dunkirk came out that Harry-style less of fangirls were we going to ruin the film for real movie lovers. Happily, I didn't encounter any of that possessiveness in my conversations for this piece. The guys I talked to, and they're all guys in their 20s. They love Tenet and Nolan in general, but they're not weird or ugly about it. On his Letterboxd profile, Nicholas Jansen, 28, describes himself as a filmmaker and film watcher, often taking to a TikToker to riff on movie news or give reviews. In late January, Costita, that his most anticipated movie of this year, would be the Tenet re-release, decrying how the film was maligned when it was initially released. The video quickly became one of his more popular recent posts. Responding by email, Jansen tells me about his first Tenet viewing. I was living in Toronto during the initial lockdown, and theaters had been closed for nearly 5 months at this point, he says. But the allure of seeing a new Christopher Nolan movie on a big screen was too enticing to pass up. So I went masked up with legitimate fear for my health to have this viewing experience. I was blown away by the concept and the technically audacious action sequences that use time in such a unique way. It's one of the great modern action films utterly propelled by vibes. If you check out the comments to Johnson's TikTok post, it's a fairly representative sample of the range of opinions surrounding Tenet. For every person who knows it's great, there's someone who insists it's overrated. Such differing takes are nothing new on the internet, but Tenet discourse is especially passionate, neither side ceding any ground. Jansen comes across as good-natured about such debates, but to those who would point to the film's subpar commercial performance as proof of its artistic failure, he argues the fact that it did make over $300 million during the height of CO is legitimately impressive and speaks to the strength of Nolan's brand. Had it been held until later in the pandemic, it only could have gone higher. Someone who definitely helped that box office total was Kenneth Moy, 26, who now resides in Los Angeles, where he's a composer. When Tenet opened in 2020, he was still living at home in Street Louis, where he saw the film 15 times as in the theater. He's planning on seeing it 5 times during its 1-week-only re-release. Although Maui has seen Tenet more than any other film on the big screen, multiple viewings isn't out of the ordinary for him. Some of my friends saw Tenet 8 times. I saw a Wunheimer 10 times in IMAX. Say I think some of them probably saw it like 5 or 6. If you think that's a lot of Tenet watching me, quickly points out I've seen stories online of people who tried to see Ida 100 times as atrically. I was like, man, I thought Aya was crazy. There's a lot of a Tenet fanaticism. Unlike China's near-empty theater, Maui remembers his first Tenet screening being packed. Missouri was very laissez-faire about CO restrictions. He tells me over Zoom. This was right during the thick of a day. People were wearing masks. Some weren't. I probably wasn't. I was like, hey, I'm young. I'm healthy. I'm just too excited for a Nolan movie. I don't care what's going on in the world. I'm going. His first viewing, he went by himself instantly, flipping for the film. The night after, I was with a body. Most of those early showings, I was with friends, because I had to bring them to see it. I was so in love with the movie that any person I have could get to go with me. I was getting to go with me. By the later showings, I went by myself. Everyone else was like, hey, dude, I've already seen it. But I was like, hey, I'm not done. So I kept going. What kept drawing him back to the theater, for one thing, because there weren't a lot of new, interesting movies coming out at that time. Tenet was essentially the only game in town, but also every time I would see it, I would pick up on a new detail. Maui says, and it just made me love the movie so much more. Just knowing all these complex details that you absolutely will not get the first time you watch it or first 5 times you watch it. People's obsessive rewatching of movies is hardly a new phenomenon. A Rodney Asher's engrossing, thought-provoking 2012 documentary Room 237 focused on different people who each had elaborate, sometimes ridiculous theories about what Stanley Kubrick's The Shining Eyes are really about. But the theories weren't what made Room 237 fascinating. It was their meditation on why certain movies strike a deep chord with us and why it can be dangerous to go too far down the path. Rabbit hole coming up with bizarre interpretations of a movie's actual intent. Talk to Tenet fans and you'll hear the occasional pet theory, but guys like Maul, we mostly seem to respond to the movie and Nolan's movies in general because of the intelligence and care he puts into them. I'm definitely a knowledge-driven person. He tells me, I love to just read Wikipedia articles, just find something that's even remotely interesting to me and start learning about it. A Tenet had me reading about entropy and thermodynamics, a Maxwell's demon, all this weird stuff. A Wunheimer had me researching nuclear physics. Any kind of concept that is brought to the table, I'm interested in. But what else makes Tenet so rewatchable is its invitation to the viewer to try to figure out precisely how time travel or inversion works in the film. Not unlike a puzzler such as Primer Tenet inspires fans to map out a labyrinth and a timely Neza that can explain what is happening when to different characters. After multiple viewings, including one in which I watched with the subtitles on as well, I have made peace with the fact that I'm never entirely going to get all of Tenet, but once I trusted that Nolan seemed to, I was able to enjoy the movie. For the Fleetbra experience, it is for its enigmatic, meticulous, playful, mad design. Of those who find the movie willfully baffling, impenetrable sack will be hard to convince in Jessica Kyang's positivity. New York Times, as a review, she observed the film is undeniably enjoyable, but its giddy grandiosity only serves to highlight the brittleness of its purported braininess. But for some like China, that densus and some people's utter exasperation with it as part of the fun asked to describe a typical Eichel Tenet head. He says, laughing at Tenet, Head knows that everyone hates this movie, loves it unabashedly, thinks the inscrableness is funny, and gets a kick out of it, and also agrees it's genius. I think there's a bit of irony to it as well. There's a bit of self-aware post-irony of just like isn't it funny that we love this movie, But also it's amazing. We're aware of how we sound when we say a 10. And it is amazing because we were there and we saw it for the first time, and we were like, hey, what? But now we're past that. It's kind of a joke, but a really sincere joke. Griffin Schiller, 28, went to the greatest lengths of anyone I spoke to in order to see Tenet, a video creator and film critic. He lives in North Hollywood, but as he puts it, because L.A. theaters weren't yet open due to CO, I was the insane person who drove. 3.5 hours there and back to go see it in Vegas for a press screening. The long drive turned out to be only part of the ordeal, though. Worst was that screening cut out right in the middle of the big action set piece. You've got the inverted army. You've got the regular army. Hey, it's like this massive spectacle. It's blowing your mind. Hey, holy, this is incredible, eh? And then, it just cuts out and we're sitting there for 15 minutes. They're trying to fix it as they try and start it back over a couple of times. Then they have to move us to another theater. The fact that the movie stayed with me or shy, that I've loved it as much as I did, is a testament to just how great the film is, despite all of those horrible first viewing things going on for me. Because Schiller follows the industry, he is not one to assume, unlike some Tenet fans online jokingly, or not that the re-release is necessarily in response to the online fervor for the film. More likely, the decision by Warner Brothers is based on certain practicalities. An IMAX re-release will get people to the theater, where audiences can see a trailer for the studio's next big IMAX spectacle, Dune Part 2, which comes out next week. And of course, Warner Brothers presumably wants to smooth things over with Nolan, who had made several films for the studio, including Tenet, but was so unhappy with the company's strategy during the pandemic to release movies in theaters and on its streaming service simultaneously that he bolted for Universal, which put out his potentially Oscar-winning Oppenheimer. In a statement in December 2020, Nolan famously declared of Warner Brothers, "Some of our industry's biggest filmmakers and most important movie stars went to bed the night before, thinking they were working for the greatest movie studio, and woke up to find out they were working for the worst streaming service," and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting, and if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.